Hi, my name is Lucy Huxley. I'm a whore, and welcome back to my bedroom. Today's episode is all about porn. I'm going to talk about my experiences, my thoughts on the industry, my thoughts on the concept of ethical porn, and all of the juicy details that you guys have been wanting to know. If you want to know how I got started doing porn, listen to the last episode. I give a big overview on my history in sex work and I talk about how I got into this industry. So, I was a porn performer from 2016 until 2020. It was never my full-time main source of income. I always did films occasionally. I had the privilege of being very picky with who I worked with, and I only worked with ethical porn companies. I always put ethical in quotes. I'm going to talk about why later on in the podcast and my thoughts on all of that, but I had very high standards for the type of companies that I worked with. They were always companies that prioritized performers' comfort and enjoyment and safety and all these things. And I would only do a few films a year, usually, throughout my career, if you even want to call it that. Throughout the 4 years I was doing porn. I don't have any personal direct experience working with mainstream porn companies, so it's hard for me to directly compare them, like what it's like working with an ethical porn company versus more mainstream porn company. But from my understanding, the scenes that we get to do in ethical porn are a lot more natural, a lot less directed, and a lot more focused on what we want to do as opposed to what the script says or what the director wants to do. Normally, when you get in touch with an ethical porn company, you will have a chat with them about what you're interested in doing. So, the types of people that you would like to perform with, the types of things you like to do, the types of things you don't want to do, so that they have a brief overview of what type of films you might be interested in participating in. When they have a film for you, they will propose it to you, and you can say yes or no, or you can say, I'm interested, but maybe if we change this part. They're usually open to being very collaborative about what you would like to do or not. And it's a similar approach with the casting. A lot of the films I did, I actually got to do with my boyfriends at the time. So that was great. A lot of ethical porn companies like to work with real couples. In cases where I was working with people I didn't know, I was always given options. Sometimes they would send me a list of a few different performers and ask me if there was anyone in particular I wanted to shoot with. Sometimes they would just send me one and I could say yes or no. If I said no, they would look for someone else. So I mostly had very good experiences with my co-stars. There were some exceptions because, sometimes I'm meeting these guys for the first time. I have no idea what they're going to be like, but usually I really loved working with the people that I got to work with. So I'm going to walk you through a typical day on set when you're shooting with a porn company like this. Before you even get to set, you already know the script, you know your co-performer. Sometimes I would meet up with my co-performer for coffee or something to discuss what we were going to do, what we wanted to do, and just get to know each other a little bit. And because the ethical porn world is so small, you would often also know a lot of other people on set, like the DOP and the makeup artist and the talent coordinator. A lot of times when I was on these sets, these were people that I was already familiar with. So usually you show up to set pretty early in the morning. I've been on a lot of different sets. The most common type of set is just an apartment, but I've also done shoots in barns. I've done shoots that were fully outdoors. I've done shoots in warehouses. We usually get started with hair and makeup and styling. There's usually snacks. A really nice perk of shoot days is always being fed very well. And the structure of the day depends on the shoot. The most common way to approach it is to start by filming all of the parts of the porn that don't involve sex. So the dialogue scenes or the B-roll or, depending on what the film is, we start off by filming all of those parts. In ethical porn and with the type of companies I was shooting with, it is more likely that there will be more dialogue involved. They want to create more of a cinematic final product. After all of that is done, we usually have lunch, maybe have to do a little bit more of that, and usually we do the sex scene at the end of the day so that performers are just able to relax and chill afterwards. Most of the time before the sex scene, we have a conversation, we being me and the other performer or performers. We have a conversation with the talent coordinator. Sometimes there's a specific talent coordinator on smaller sets. It's often just the director or the producer. We all have a conversation together to go over our boundaries, our desires, and the general plan of the shoot. With the types of shoots I was doing, they were very loosely directed. So, for some of them, there's a theme or a certain script or certain things that we're planning to do during the sex scene. But once the sex scene starts, there's usually very, very minimal input from the director, from anyone on the team. It's really just about us enjoying ourselves. So the director would say action, and we would usually just start by, making out, doing some foreplay, and then having sex. For me, it usually felt quite genuine. I would always try to approach it in the same way that I would approach having sex with anybody in a private situation. But I was also having to be aware of the camera because in order to be a good performer, you have to be aware of where the camera is and be aware that there's certain things you need to show to the camera. Like say a guy's going down on you and like your legs are closed and you're facing the opposite of direction of the camera so the camera can't see anything. That's not going to be great. So there is always this thing in the back of my mind of like thinking, where is the camera, making sure that I'm facing it in a good general direction. Obviously, the camera can move as well. It's never being shot where the camera is just on a tripod and not moving. But that's really the only thing that I would focus on aside from actually just having sex and enjoying it. And then usually it would be up to us performers to call cut and say when we were done, basically. After that, the director or the team would go over the footage, and if they needed anything else, we might do a second sex scene. They would say, hey, like, could you do a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that? So we would go again and get a few more shots. And then after that, usually the day would wrap up. We would be able to shower, eat some more, hang out a little bit, cuddle if we needed to. That happens. And that is basically a typical day on set. There's definitely exceptions. I have been on some shoots where we would do the sex scene at the beginning of the day. One I did for Erica Lust called Dirty Feet. We were shooting on a giant bed of clay and we were covered in mud. And we decided to do the sex scene at the very beginning of the day so that we could get it over with and clean up afterwards and shower and just be able to do that difficult sex scene while we were energized at the beginning of the day and then do everything else afterwards. Another thing I will mention is the amount of people that can be on set. So I've done porn shoots where there's anywhere from one other person on set, just one person filming me, to 15 to 20 people on set. One shoot I did, there were also journalists from Elle France on set. Like, it can be a very big experience, which I always found exciting. Like I mentioned in my previous episode, I was definitely an exhibitionist, so I enjoyed having people on set and having people watching me. Another film I did that was shot a little bit out of the ordinary was Hunger with Erica Lust, which I think was my most popular film I've ever done. This one was actually a 2-day shoot because it was quite a long script and we had two sex scenes in the film. And we also had multiple days of rehearsal leading up to the actual shoot because it was so dialogue heavy. With the 2 days of shooting, we actually did both sex scenes on the second day. And this was because they had to rent a crane for the camera. So it's basically this special type of tripod equipment for the camera to go on. And they wanted to be able to only rent it for 1 day to save on the budget. And they wanted to use the crane for both sex scenes. We had like a regular sex scene and then like a dream sex scene. So we shot two scenes in 1 day, which is not really normal when you're working for these type of companies. The director did check with us beforehand when he was planning everything if me and my co-star Parker would be okay with doing two scenes in 1 day. I was totally fine with it. It was a bit of a struggle for Parker, but he made it work. I mean, the final film is amazing. But I do remember when we were filming the second sex scene that day, Parker was supposed to come on my face and on my chest while I was like kneeling in front of him. And he was having a hard time coming because it was the second sex scene of the day. And of course, with the pressure of like the entire cast standing around in silence, waiting for you to come. I just remember the intenseness and tension of that moment. It did take him some time, and I was just sitting there waiting, like doing my best to look hot, to do anything to help him come. And I could see he was struggling with it, but he did eventually come. You can see it in the film, I guess, if you're curious. But that was one of my more unique experiences with sex scenes. Well, actually, that's a lie because I did work for this one company called Waterworld that specialized in water fetish films. And these were definitely the weirdest films I ever did. So I didn't even know about these types of fetishes before I started working with this company. The company was ran by a couple, a man and a woman, and the woman would shoot all the films just by herself. It was very casual, very low key. They would just shoot on little digital cameras. But the things we were shooting were either very straightforward water fetish stuff. So her and I would go to a pool or a jacuzzi and she would film me underwater. I would have to like blow bubbles and dive underwater and open my eyes or like step on the camera while it was on the pool floor, things like that. So a very direct water fetish. The other thing that I would do with them was this specific type of condom fetish. I think there's a name for it, but I don't remember what it is. But what I had to do for these videos is I literally had to put a condom on my head. Yes, they do fit. Condoms do stretch that much. So I would have to put a condom over my head, over my entire face, like until it was around the top of my neck. And then I would have to blow it up. So I would hold the condom so that it was below my nose and above my mouth so that I could inhale through my mouth and exhale through my nose and inflate the condom so that it became this like tall balloon thing over my head and then pull it back down. And apparently there is a big market, or maybe not big, but there is, a reasonable market for this type of fetish. And a big part of the fetish for some people is asphyxiation while having this inflated condom over your head. So we would do scenes where I would blow up the condom on my head and pull it back down over my mouth and I would like sit in one spot for a while and eventually I would pretend to pass out. So they would have two different cameras running so that they could cut it together later and I would be able to take breaks to breathe, obviously. But at the end of the scene, I would pretend to pass out from the asphyxiation. It was all pretend, as doing something like that in real life would be very dangerous, but I did quite a few scenes with them like that. I think with that company, I only did one real sex scene with them and one masturbation sex scene, and the rest of them were just these really interesting and unique fetish type things. So I also want to talk about the topic of payment in porn because I have a lot of things to say about this. I've spoken about this briefly on my TikTok account as well. When I was working in porn, which was from 2016 to 2020, I would get paid anywhere from 500 euros to 1200 euros for a scene. And for some of the shoots with Waterworld, the company I just mentioned, where I was just doing fetish stuff and not really masturbating or doing anything, they were like shorter shoots, I would get paid 350 euros, I think. Looking back, these are incredibly low amounts, and it's really a gripe I have with the porn industry in general, how low the payment is when you compare it to how much money these companies are making and how much money these companies continue to make after the shoot is over. Because there are no royalties in porn. With traditional acting, actors get royalties whenever their TV show or movie is licensed in a new way. This is what the big actor strike last year was all about. It was about them not getting enough royalties from streaming. In porn, we never see any royalties at all. And I think because of the nature of the work that we do, we really deserve those royalties to a high level because these films of us having sex are going to be online forever, and we have no control over them. We have no control over where they are displayed, who they are licensed to, who might end up seeing them, and we just get a one-time payment and nothing after that. There are a couple of small indie companies who are trying to provide royalties to their performers, which is amazing. But those small companies are the outliers, and because they are small companies, they're not really able to provide big amounts of royalties in any way. So back to the amounts I was getting paid. Like I said, it was anywhere from 500 euros to 1200 euros for a scene. The ones where I got paid 1200 euros, that only happened twice, and those were both for 2-day shoots. So those were really the exception. The norm was more 500 to 800 euros per scene. So maybe you're thinking, okay, so if the pay was so low and you don't get any royalties, like how is it worth it then? So for some context at the time, like I said, this was from 2016 to 2020. You know, we didn't have as much inflation as we do now. Also, I was living in Berlin, which has a very low cost of living. In 2016, my rent was 280 euros a month. In 2020, my rent was 400 euros a month. So even though looking back, this wasn't a lot of money, it felt like a lot of money to me at the time because I was making my rent in a day doing work that I enjoyed. And nowadays, the industry has changed a lot because of OnlyFans. So it's actually very profitable to do a porn film with a large company and use that as marketing for your own OnlyFans. So doing porn films is less about the money you make from that one specific film and more about a business decision to market your own OnlyFans, which you can make a lot of money from. And this is actually why I'm planning to do a couple porn films again. It kind of creates a way for performers to make royalties for themselves. It's not the same as getting royalties, but it does create more of a return than just getting this one-time low payment for a film of you having sex that's going to exist on the internet forever. And, when I say we have no control over the films that are on the internet, I really mean it. Like, one of my films appeared in a Netflix show a couple years ago, and I had no control over that. I got an email from the production company, like, letting me know. They were like, hey, just so you know, this little clip of your porn film is going to be in this Netflix show, just a heads up. And I didn't get any say in the approval of that or not. Obviously, it's laid out in the contract when you sign contracts with these companies that they have the rights to the usage and they have the rights to license the films elsewhere, but it's not something I ever would have expected when I started doing porn, that my porn would end up on a Netflix show, So this kind of leads me to the topic of ethical porn, ethical being in quotation marks, and, can porn really be ethical or not? I have a problem with the terminology of ethical porn because it creates this false dichotomy that porn is either ethical or it's not. And that is simply not the truth. It is a spectrum. You can make porn that is more ethical. You can make porn where the performers are treated better, but I don't think that there is a be all and end all that makes a porn company or a porn shoot 100% ethical because this is a very complex and nuanced topic. And nowadays, I feel like ethical porn is really used as a marketing tool. I feel the same way about female-led porn. There are a lot of companies that advertise themselves as being female-led companies, And their directors are female, a lot of the people on set are female, and the reality is that behind the scenes the CEO of the company is a man. So I think it's important to keep in mind as a consumer when you see these terms like female led and ethical porn, that these are literally just marketing terms, and there's a lot more information that is worth looking into if you care about porn being ethical or not. One thing that was quite shocking to me when working in the ethical porn industry was that with some of the companies that I worked with, it was written in our contracts that if we stopped the sex scene before it was finished and before the team had everything that they needed to complete the shoot, we would not receive any payment at all. This is still wild to me looking back because consent has to be ongoing to be true consent. And if you are in a situation where you are on a porn set and something happens and you don't want to continue shooting, but you know you're not going to get any money if you stop and say that you have to leave for the day, and maybe you're in a situation where you need that money for your rent, you need that money to pay for something, how is that ethical? And so some people might think, well, how is this any different from escorting? Isn't it the same thing? Escorting is what I currently do for work, and it is very different. When you are working as an escort, when you meet up with a client, you always get the cash in hand at the very beginning of the date before anything starts. Whereas in porn, you get paid via invoice like well after the shoot. When you are seeing a client as an escort, if something happens during the date where you can't continue, there is never a situation where you are obligated to return 100% of the money that you have received. If I am in a situation where something happens on my end and I cannot complete the date because of something that's 100% on me, I would return a portion of the money to the client. How much would depend on how long I've been there and how much more time we were supposed to have in our booking. If something happened where the client did something that crossed my boundaries or the client did something to terminate the booking, I would keep 100% of the money. There would never be a situation like there is that is clearly laid out in these porn contracts where if you stop before the end, you don't get paid anything. And these companies that have these clauses in their contracts, I also don't know if they still have these clauses in their contracts because I haven't been working in the industry for 4 years. But the fact that they did in the past, at least, still makes me angry. These companies were not tiny little indie companies, that really wouldn't be able to afford to pay performers if they weren't able to get a final film. I'm talking about larger companies that would definitely be able to find the funds to pay a performer even if things were not completed. The very last film I shot as a porn performer was a very, very difficult experience for me. And I'm going to tell the whole story because I think it will illustrate a lot of what I'm trying to say about ethical porn. I've never told this story publicly before, and I've debated whether or not to share it, but I've never heard someone talk about an experience like this, and it is really a reality of doing this type of work. So, the last two films I did, they were shot very close to each other. I had one film and then a day off. It wasn't really a day off. I actually had to do a cam show for a company on that day. And then I did my final film. When I was planning all of this, I didn't know that it was going to be my final film. I hadn't decided yet. Basically, what happened, I have to give you some context here. At the time, I was dating this guy. I had been dating him for about 3 months. And I very much identified with being non-monogamous. I had always been in non-monogamous relationships. So me and this guy were seeing each other, he knew what I did for work and everything. And I went to the first porn shoot in this week that I'm talking about. And the shoot went well. It was with a performer I had worked before. It was with a super nice team. But after we finished the sex scene, I went to the bathroom and I started crying because I felt so emotional, and I realized that I only wanted to have sex with the guy that I was dating at the time. And I had never felt this way before in my life. But having this experience of sleeping with somebody else for the first time since I started dating this guy really made me realize that I didn't want to sleep with anybody else. I just wanted to be with him. And that was a massive realization for me as someone who had been very vocally non-monogamous for like 5 years. So that night, I went to his apartment and I told him that I wanted to be in a monogamous relationship with him. And from my perspective, from our 3 months of dating, it was very clear that things were heading towards a relationship anyway. But when I told him this, that was not his perspective. And he was very taken aback. And he basically said that he had never even considered being in a relationship with me and that he didn't want that. So I was incredibly heartbroken. And the next day, I had a costume fitting for the second film I was going to do that week. And I had to do a solo cam show for one of the companies I was working with. And also, the behind the scenes crew for the second film I was doing that week was following me around the whole day to record the behind the scenes of being a porn performer. And that whole day, I was just trying so hard not to cry. I was so heartbroken. I was so devastated. And then the following day, I did what would be my final porn scene. And I decided the day before, basically, I was like, this is going to be my last scene. Because even though things didn't work out with this guy and we obviously didn't have a relationship, I knew that I would feel the same way about someone else in the future. So I decided that I wanted to prioritize being able to have a monogamous relationship in the future and that I didn't want to do porn anymore. And also, I had had some, mediocre experiences with other films I had done recently. And I spoke about this in my last podcast episode, how it kind of stopped being fun for me, and I didn't want to force myself to do something if it wasn't fun. I basically went into my very last porn shoot knowing it was going to be my last one and slightly dreading it because I was so incredibly heartbroken after having this realization that I wanted to be monogamous with this man I cared about very much, and then being heartbroken by him, and then I had to go to work and have sex with other people. And it was really the last thing I wanted to do that day. I get upset even just like thinking about it. And I really didn't have the option to cancel because I was the main talent. And if I canceled that day, everyone who was booked to shoot that day would have lost their job. I mean, not their job, but that gig they had. And, most of the people working on these shoots are freelancers, low income, these things make a big difference to us. And I was the main star of the shoot, so it was really all riding on me. And I also wanted the money from doing that shoot. I had planned to receive that income that month. So I did my final porn shoot. I basically just like grin and bared it. Um, there's that Taylor Swift song that came out recently called I Can Do It with a Broken Heart. And yeah, I really relate that to this experience. I think the lyrics are like lights, camera, bitch, smile, even when you want to die. Because that is how I felt. I remember after we finished the sex scene, I just went into the bathroom and I just cried and cried because I was so upset and so unhappy, and I just really didn't enjoy the experience. And it's really a shame because it was a shoot that I had actually been really particularly looking forward to, and it had been planned for a long time, and it was just ruined because of my emotional state at the time. And I really don't blame it on anybody. I don't think that there's anything that could have particularly been done to avoid the situation. It's the nature of this type of work. If you're being booked to shoot a porn film, you have to show up and do it no matter what your emotional state is. But experiences like this do happen. And, then again, this is why I say there's no porn that is ethical or not ethical. The line is blurry because this shoot was handled so well. The team was so amazing. There was really great communication, but it was not a good experience for me because of the nature of the work and just because of what I was personally going through at the time. I have never watched that film to this day, and I don't want to. I've seen photos from it, and I can see the pain in my own eyes because I know what I was going through. A lot of my fans have said that this film is actually their favorite one out of all of my films. And it doesn't bother me at all that it's out there and that people enjoy it, but because of my experience, it's not something I've ever watched, and I'll probably never watch it. So that was my very last film in 2020. And when I decided to stop, I really thought that I would never return to the porn industry. I made an announcement that I was quitting. I deleted my big Twitter account that I had. Like it was over for me. I was committed. I mean, I'm that type of person. When I decide something, I go all the way. But like I've spoken about in my last episode, I restarted my OnlyFans recently, and I'm going to film some boy girl content for my OnlyFans. And I am also in discussion with one of the companies I have worked with before to shoot at least one more film with them this year because it would be a really good marketing decision for me as an escort and also for my OnlyFans. It would serve really well to promote myself in both of those ways. And also, I feel like I'm in a place now where I would enjoy being on set again. And even if things were to happen in my emotional life, I would be able to handle it much better and I would be much more prepared than I was in the past when I had these negative experiences. And I really do love being on a film set. I love the experience of being surrounded by all these talented people who are very focused and working hard toward the same goal of creating an amazing end product. And I am really looking forward to that experience again. So I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but I am in discussion with Erica Lust and X Confessions to shoot another film with them. Nothing is decided for sure. I don't have any dates yet. It might be quite a while, so it's not going to happen within the next month or anything, but hopefully that is going to happen this year. All right, now I'm going to answer the questions that you guys asked me on Instagram. I put up a question box. I do this semi-regularly, so make sure you are following me on Instagram at Lucy Huxley X. I will also note my next episode is going to be all about my history working as a stripper. So I'm going to do a question box this week. If you have any questions about stripping, you can ask me. Now, let's get into the porn ones. What is my favorite porn shoot I've ever done? So I think that the one that was the most fun for me to shoot was my Queen for a Day film for Ersties. So Ersties was the first porn company that I ever worked with. They were always so enjoyable to work with. And they called me up one day and they basically said, "Hey, we're doing this new series where we are making girls' fantasies come to life. Do you have a fantasy in mind that we could do for a shoot?" And I was like, you know what? Actually, I do, which was rare for me because, if I have a fantasy, I make it happen. But I had this fantasy for a while of like being a queen and having like a line of submissive boys just come up and take turns going down on me. And I hadn't been able to enact that in real life because, as anyone who has tried to organize group sex before, especially when it's one woman and multiple men, it's difficult to find people. It's difficult to organize. It takes a lot of logistics. So I was basically like, great, so you guys are going to handle all of the logistics. So at the time, I had two boyfriends. I was non-monogamous, and they were both in the shoot. And then the other two boys were performers that I knew about or had worked with before. And it really just was my fantasy come to life. It was such a fun shoot. And I think the film that I am most proud of, like the one that I think has the best final result is Hunger. That film was actually directed by my ex-boyfriend, Hunter S. Johnson. He was my ex when he directed it. I did a little story time about it on TikTok if you want to know more about what it was like to be directed in porn by my ex. But it was a good experience, and I think the final film is amazing. I think it was my most popular one ever on Ex Confessions. Next question is, are there intimacy coordinators on shoots? So when I was working in the industry, there was no one on set who had the title of intimacy coordinator. We did have talent coordinators who kind of took that role. They were always people who had worked in the porn industry themselves before, and their job was essentially to ensure that the talent had everything that we needed and that we were comfortable, and they would facilitate a discussion between us about the sex scene and kind of the intimacy coordination aspect of it. This would happen on larger sets. On smaller sets, it would be the director or like the DOP or the producer who would handle that intimacy discussion. Nowadays, intimacy coordinators are a lot more spoken about. Like, back when I was in the industry, I didn't even know what an intimacy coordinator was. I do know that Erica Lust does now have intimacy coordinators on set. I've seen on their social media that they do have a specific person for that. But again, I think it still depends a lot on the size of the team. Did I ever meet guys during a shoot that were hot and then met them in private? So, no, this never happened to me personally. I did consider it with one performer. I had shot with him a couple times and I was going through kind of a dry spell in my personal life. And I was like, what if I just hit him up and be like, hey, I know we've worked together before, but like, I would love to see you casually if it wouldn't affect our professional relationship. But I ended up not doing that. I ended up starting dating somebody else casually. But I do know it does happen sometimes in the porn industry where people will get together, but it's really an exception. It's not the norm. Someone else also asked me if I've ever fallen in love with somebody I met in set. That has never happened. I do know stories of that happening in the industry, but it is incredibly rare. I think in general in this industry, we are quite professional about it and we approach it as a job. Could I stop or pause filming if I was not feeling good? Yes, with all of the companies that I worked with, at any time I could call cut to take a break, to get some water, to change something. That was always made abundantly clear to us that we were in control and that we could say cut if we needed to for any reason. Did I ever get an STD from porn? No, I didn't. The only time I've ever gotten an STD was when I was 20. I got chlamydia from some guy I was dating. I've never gotten an STD from any type of sex work. STD testing in porn is very important. The industry standard is that you need an STD test from within 14 days of your shoot date. I prefer to do it within a week of my shoot date. All of the talent has to have a fully negative STD panel in order to proceed with the shoot. A negative STD panel, of course, is not foolproof, but as professionals in this job, it's something that we would take very seriously. I would never do like a risky protection-free hookup like 2 weeks before doing a porn shoot because then I would run the risk of getting an STD. And if I got an STD, that would like mess up my ability to work. It is so incredibly rare for STD transmissions to happen in porn because testing standards are so rigorous. In some countries, there are legal laws around it. I think in 2018, there was a syphilis outbreak in Europe among porn performers, and that was a big deal. That's one of the only times it's ever happened. And shooting essentially came to a halt until it was gotten under control and until everybody was able to test negative. I heard somewhere that porn smells bad. Is that true? Porn just smells like sex? I mean, we're just having sex. There's nothing unique about it that makes it smell any different. So, sex can have a smell. So there's that. But that's it. It also depends on the ventilation of the room where we're shooting in. But I would never say it smells bad or has a particular smell that people wouldn't expect at all. Have I ever had unsafe experiences shooting porn and how did I get out of it? No, I haven't. Like I mentioned before, I have been very privileged to be able to be very selective about who I shot with for porn. So I never had any unsafe experiences with it. Somebody asked where to find good porn besides Pornhub, which is such a good question because a lot of people only know Pornhub or these other massive tube sites. There's no guarantee that the performers are being treated well, and it's also just a different quality and a different type of porn on these tube sites. The general rule, if you're looking for ethical porn, if you're looking for porn where the performers are being treated well, you need to pay for it. If you're accessing the porn for free, somebody along the line is getting shortchanged, and it's probably the performers. So if you want to make sure the performers are being treated well, you need to be paying for your porn. If you are looking for high quality porn that is cinematic, that has a diverse cast, that is queer, I recommend looking at the companies X Confessions by Erica Lust, Pink Label TV, Cheeks with an X, and Bellesa. All three of those companies license films by smaller indie companies. There's a lot of really interesting stuff on their sites. I also really recommend Four Chambered Heart or Four Chambers. They do super beautiful artsy films. I really love their stance on ethical porn as well. They don't call themselves an ethical porn company because they understand that it's kind of a false dichotomy, but I really respect the way that they run their sets from what I've heard from friends who have worked with them, and they just do super interesting artsy stuff. There's also Aorta Films, that's spelled Aorta, and Erstes and Lustery. Um, there's also plenty more. Those are the ones that I know. Once you kind of get into the scene and maybe start following performers who are in films that you like, and then you'll see other companies that these performers have worked with, you can find a lot of really amazing stuff. And of course, independent porn nowadays with OnlyFans is one of the best ways to get ethical porn to support the performers directly. So, so that is everything for today. Make sure you tune into next week's episode. I'm going to actually read out of the diary I kept when I was a stripper. There's definitely some juicy stuff in there that I have never ever shared before, so I'm excited for that. My name is Lucy Huxley. I'm a whore, and thank you for joining me in my bedroom.